In tonight's news edition, in a meeting with British parliamentary committees, His Majesty the King urges more help for Jordan to deal with more than 500,000 Syrian refugees. The Prime Minister assures that bread and flour prices will not be raised, but the government will address overconsumption of the heavily subsidized staple. And as the United States prepares for talks with the Taliban in Qatar, President Obama says Afghans must talk to each other. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. On a visit to the United Kingdom, His Majesty the King met British House of Lords and House of Commons committees for talks on regional developments focusing on the Syrian crisis and efforts to achieve peace. King Abdullah reiterated Jordan's stance of a transitional solution to the Syrian crisis and spoke about its repercussions on the security and stability of the Middle East. He said Jordan had to bear enormous burdens as it hosts more than 500,000 Syrian refugees, urging the international community to aid the kingdom in this regard. He also thanked the UK for its support of Jordan to shoulder its humanitarian responsibility towards the refugees. King Abdullah briefed the British lawmakers on efforts to bring an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and achieve peace according to the two-state solution. He said Jordan will pursue its efforts with all the parties to help the Palestinians and Israelis return to the negotiating table and address all final status issues. He said a peace deal should lead to a viable and independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, living in peace and security alongside Israel. King Abdullah also said the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative is a historic opportunity to achieve peace. The king said Jordan had gone a long way from the reform process to develop democratic and partisan life and ensure popular participation in the decision-making process. The lawmakers hailed Jordan's economic reform program and the king's effort to address regional issues, pledging more help for Jordan to deal with the refugees. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein bin Abdullah attended the first graduation ceremony of the Prince Hussein bin Abdullah II Civil Protection Academy in the presence of Director General of Civil Defense Lieutenant General Talal Kofahi. His Highness presented the 64 graduates with their certificates and awards for top students in the fields of fire engineering, public safety, disaster management, and emergency medical specialist. In his speech, head of the Balqa Applied University, Nabil Al-Shawaqfeh, hailed the academy established in response to the comprehensive development Jordan is witnessing in all fields. The aim of the academy, which opened in 2009, is to create an international center of civil defense and protection and to establish the concept of preventative awareness, in addition to enriching research in specialized civil defense studies. Deputizing for His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Hussein patronized the Joint Military Exercise Eagle Lion 2013. Also joining the exercise was Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Mohammed Zeben, and senior armed forces officers and military attachés of countries taking part in the exercise. A joint Jordanian-U.S. force of armored and mechanized units carried a mock attack on ground targets with air support by F-16 fighter jets and helicopters, as well as artillery, mortar, and anti-tank vehicles. The troops displayed high combat efficiency, hitting targets with precision and successfully carrying out tasks. Troops from some 19 Arab and foreign countries have taken part in the annual exercise, which also features an anti-piracy drill by naval forces in the Gulf of Aqaba. Zeben said the exercise is part of routine exercises in the kingdom and more will take place in the future.
This exercise is performed by 18 or 19 countries from sister Arab and friendly nations. It is part of a series carried by the armed forces, and I think that this exercise was executed last year and will also take place next year. There is nothing to add on this series of exercises.
Prime Minister Abdullah assured that the government will not raise the prices of bread or flour, not now or in the future, saying maintaining prices is a strategy of the state. But he said the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Supply will address the wasting of a huge amount of the heavily subsidized food staple through overconsumption or smuggling to other countries, adding that wasted amounts of bread are estimated to run in the hundreds of millions. The Prime Minister also told a meeting at the ministry that his government will ensure preparation has begun early for the holy month of Ramadan. He told traders, industrialists and importers, members of the Consumer Protection Society and Food Sector Association, that the government will guarantee that basic commodities are in abundant supply at reasonable prices to avoid congestion and provide a better service to the public during the holy month. Mansour urged ministry staff and the public to monitor the markets and identify greedy traders. Industry and Trade Minister Hatem Halawani said providing good quality and affordable food is a key priority and that his ministry had ensured enough supplies of staples like rice, sugar, meat and oil. A group tried to infiltrate Jordan's northern border from Syria and attacked a border guard post. An Armed Forces General Command source said the border guard clashed with the group, killing one infiltrator and wounding 2 others. It said the injured were evacuated to hospital. Rebels attacked a main highway in northern Syria to try to choke off a major supply line for government forces in the region. Meanwhile, the core group of 11 nations making up the Friends of Syria will meet on Saturday in Doha. A French Foreign Ministry official said they will discuss concrete help for the Free Syrian Army after recent successes by government forces. Hala Dababne has the details.
Peace efforts on Syria are at a stalemate. Heavy fighting resumes in the country's north. A loud explosion was heard near a military site in the Syrian port city of Latakia, but the cause of the blast was unclear. State television said it was caused by a technical fault at a weapons store at a military engineering base and said 6 people were hurt. The opposition said the blast on the base was still unclear, but said 13 soldiers were wounded. Residents said the blast shook most of the city and shattered windows. Iraq's Foreign Minister Hoshyar Zubari said his country faces a huge pressure trying to maintain its official neutrality on Syria.
Iraq is in the most difficult position vis-à-vis this regional turmoil. And the conflict in Syria has become a regional conflict by all standards.
Iraq says it supports no side in the war, calling for a negotiated settlement. But Western powers say the Shiite-led government allows Iranian flights carrying weapons to Syrian government forces through Iraqi airspace, a charge Baghdad denies.
We are doing our best to maintain an independent and a neutral position, but the pressures are enormous. And for how long we can hold really is a matter of further development in Syria.
U.S. President Barack Obama said reports that the United States was ready to go to war in Syria were exaggerated. He repeated that the Damascus government had used chemical weapons and could not regain legitimacy.
Some of the stories that have been out there publicly have, I think, gotten a little overcranked in terms of the idea that somehow the United States is preparing to go all in and participate in another war. What we want to do is end a war.
After the G8 summit, where Syria was a key topic, British Prime Minister David Cameron told the House of Commons he's committed to an international peace plan to end the conflict in Syria.
We are committed to using diplomacy to end this war with a political solution. This is not easy, but the essential first step must be to get agreement between the main international powers with influence on Syria. That is what we've done at the G8 in Locarno. We must now turn these commitments into action.
The G8 summit ended yesterday with leaders calling for peace talks to be held as soon as possible to resolve the Syrian civil war. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon told Chinese state media in Beijing that the Syrian crisis needs a political solution, not a military one.
I really urge world leaders to agree on a political modality where we can resolve this one. At this time, I again believe that there is no military solutions. Only political solution can be a way to address this issue.
At the G8 summit, no date was mentioned for a peace conference called by Moscow and Washington, which was supposed to take place next month. But now it appears to be on hold after the United States announced last week that it would arm the rebels. A source at the summit said the peace conference would now be put off at least until August. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The United Nations Refugee Agency reported that last year saw the global refugee population exceed 45 million, a record high that can be primarily attributed to the ongoing Syrian conflict. The UNHCR report shows that over 50% of the refugees came from 5 of the worst war-torn nations: Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, and Sudan. The 2-year Syrian crisis became the dominant cause of refugee growth.
The important thing would be to stop the war, because it's important to support refugees. It's much better to avoid that they exist. But in between, it's essential that the international community engages more strongly in financial support to humanitarian action and to the countries of the region. And it's also very important that more burden sharing is offered to countries like Lebanon or Jordan, just to name 2, but also Turkey, Iraq, that are making a gigantic effort to protect the Syrian refugees.
The Taliban spokesman in Qatar said representatives of the Afghan insurgency would meet U.S. officials for preliminary peace talks tomorrow, but no time has been set. The spokesman, Mohammed Naeem, said no Afghan government officials would be at the meeting. A team of U.S. negotiators arrived in Qatar earlier in the day and held a meeting with Afghan diplomats in the Qatari capital. Earlier, Afghan President Hamid Karzai said his government would not join the U.S. talks with the Taliban until they were led by Afghans and would suspend negotiations with the United States on a troop pact. U.S. President Barack Obama said Afghans must talk to each other to resolve the conflict in their country, even though huge mistrust exists between the government and its Taliban foes.
We welcome President Karzai's announcement yesterday that Afghan forces will soon take the lead for security across the country, which is an important milestone, one that we established in our NATO summit. We do think ultimately we're going to need to see Afghans talking to Afghans about how they can move forward and end the cycle of violence there so that they can start actually building their country.
However, fighting continued in the war-ravaged Afghanistan. 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in a rocket attack on the heavily fortified Bagram base near Kabul. Turkey's deputy prime minister said he had no objection to silent anti-government protest. The comment could ease 3 weeks of tension and often violent demonstrations. Protesters against Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan's government have become increasingly creative in recent days to avoid fierce clashes. We get more in this report.
Protesters in Istanbul have adopted a new tactic in their battle with Turkey's ruling party. They stood in silence in Taksim Square on Tuesday. The silent standing protest was inspired by a lone man whose solitary 8-hour stint in the same square has lit up social media websites. The eerie sight is in stark contrast to the clashes with police witnessed often during 3 weeks of unrest. Among the protesters, there were differing reasons for taking part.
We're not here just to demonstrate. We want to do something by remaining calm. We're not here to criticize a political party or support another one. We just want people to do the right thing. And we also want Atatürk to be remembered forever.
We don't recognize the ruling AK party anymore. It's obvious from their statements and the measures they've taken that they have not understood the protests here.
In Ankara, where some 200 protesters gathered early on Wednesday, there were more familiar scenes. Riot police moved in with water cannon, but were initially blocked from advancing by a sit-in. Western nations have expressed concerns about police handling of the protests. Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan said on Tuesday the police had taken a democratic stance in the face of violence from those he called terrorists, anarchists and rioters.
Russia said the U.S. deployment of anti-missile shields was a huge hurdle to any further cuts in the offensive nuclear arsenal of the former Cold War foes. Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin cited concerns that the interceptors could shoot down Russian missiles. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed concern about U.S. missile defenses and high-precision weapons. President Barack Obama said in Berlin that he wants to reduce deployed nuclear weapons by up to a third and revive negotiations with Russia to move beyond Cold War nuclear postures.
After a comprehensive review, I've determined that we can ensure the security of America and our allies and maintain a strong and credible strategic deterrent while reducing our deployed strategic nuclear weapons by up to one-third.
In a joint press conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, they also touched on Afghanistan, Syria, and the global economy. The American president also said the United States would step up efforts to close Guantanamo Bay prison.
Even as we remain vigilant about the threat of terrorism, we must move beyond the mindset of perpetual war. And in America, that means redoubling our efforts to close the prison at Guantanamo.
Militants in Somalia carried out a deadly attack on a United Nations compound in the capital. Interior Minister Hussein said 4 foreign UN security staff and 4 local guards were killed in a drawn-out gun battle that left 7 insurgent fighters dead. A UN spokesman said casualty numbers were still being verified. The assault, claimed by Islamist al-Shabaab, began before midday when a car bomb exploded outside the UN Development Program UNDP base. Rebel gunmen then forced their way into the compound and battled with security guards. It was the first serious attack on UN premises by al-Shabaab since they were driven out of Mogadishu in fighting with African Union and Somali government forces about 2 years ago. Brazil and Mexico took to the practice field for some last-minute training just hours ahead of their highly anticipated face-off in the Confederation Cup. Mexico goes into the match after losing to Italy 2-1 in their opening game on Sunday, while Brazil came out triumphant over Japan 3-0 in its opener. The stakes are high for Mexico because a loss coupled with an Italy victory over Japan would force them out of the tournament. Despite his retirement, British soccer star David Beckham is still in the limelight. Thousands of fans screamed and cheered when he made his appearance at the public sports stadium in eastern China. In March, China named the former England captain as its global soccer ambassador to revive the game's image and promote the game in the world's most populous country. Beckham's second trip to China this year will see him observe games, attend training sessions, and take part in charitable events in Beijing and eastern cities. And finally, a quick look at the weather. Cool tonight in most regions with southwesterly light winds. Tomorrow it'll be fair in hilly areas and relatively hot in the rest of the country, with moderate winds picking up at times. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a mild night and hot tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. In a meeting with British parliamentary committees, His Majesty the King urges more help for Jordan to deal with more than 500,000 Syrian refugees. The Prime Minister assures that bread and flour prices will not be raised, but the government will address overconsumption of the heavily subsidized food staple. And as the United States prepares for talks with the Taliban in Qatar, President Obama says Afghans must talk to each other. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.